Hello everybody, KT here with Wise Images Photography. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Today what we are going to go ahead and go over are simple techniques that you can use in Lightroom to make your photographs pop just a little bit. We aren't even talking about anything crazy. We're kind of talking about, what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna kind of show you guys my starting point. So if you're just starting in Lightroom, this would be a good place for you to start, just to get a little bit of a pop going on with your photographs, get them going in the right direction. So nothing completely crazy. We're not even going to go over curves. We are going to go into the HSL sliders just a little bit, but not much, and I'll tell you why. But overall, we're just going to do some easy, simple edits, and then I'm also going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the photograph and why I like it and the simplicity of it, and kind of give you guys also a little bit of like compositional tips. Nobody wants ticks. Compositional tips to help you out. All right, but before we get going into that, real quickly, if you have not changed your January picture, for those of you who got the digital calendar, make sure that you change your background. If you got a paper calendar, which by the way, I need to change mine, make sure that you change to February. All right, so there you go. So January was up, and now we are into February. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get going. All right, so this is the start of my photograph here. This is a Sanderling. They live for like about 13 years. They don't have a back toe, which is kind of very interesting. As you can tell that this image is pretty low. Let me make sure that I have my levels on the right spot here. I always like to, I calibrate my monitor. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so I was in the right brightness level for my image, because when I go to print, I calibrate everything with the monitors or with the printers, and that way when everything gets back to me, I know how it's going to print. I'm going to know if it's going to be bright enough or whatnot. So, and also make sure that the coloring is correct as well. Now, a lot of times when I am photographing birds, I do tend to keep my focal point in the middle, especially if I'm trying to hit a moving targeted bird. I kind of find it's easy to know where my bird's going to be as I am trying to find that focal point. When I go to put something to print, that is normally when I do a little bit of the cropping, because if you guys notice, when I have January here, notice I have already cropped in on this little guy. Now I almost got like his eye right there on that third level. So using that rule of thirds, but when he's in his post-production stage, notice that he's not really there. So a lot of times that's when I do my cropping. I normally don't do too much cropping when I'm in Lightroom. The reason why I like this particular photograph is because this is a very simplistic photograph. There is not a lot of craziness going on. You have the sand in the forefront, you have your subject, which is your bird, which is your Sanderling, and then you have the beautiful bokeh in the back with the waves that are kind of crashing behind your bird. Now, what do I do to get my photographs going in the right direction? And like I said, this is going to be a very simple edit. This is just to kind of get you used to these sliders and get you rocking and rolling. So first things first, I feel like the color temperature to this particular photograph is fine. So I'm actually not going to go ahead and adjust it here. But what I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull up, and see, as I pull to the right, it gets bright. I pull to the left, it gets really super dark. I normally tend to start all of my images out on 0.80. And that's where I start. And I'm like, well, okay, if I like that and I think it's going to print up nicely, then I will go ahead and go with that. Now, personally, I like a lot of contrast. So if you go this way, you're going to increase the contrast. If you go to the right to the left, you're going to kind of like lose a lot of that contrast. I love contrast, you guys. So I bump that up to about 50. Then after that, I'm going to go ahead and I look at my highlights. A lot of times what I will do is I will go ahead and pull down my highlights a little bit. So if you pull down, everything gets darker. If you go to the right, It gets a little bit brighter. There's not much that you can see. A lot of times when you get into these edits, it's just a lot of it is playing around. Just play around, see what the different buttons do, so to speak. So I go ahead and I bring this down to -15, and then I go ahead and actually open up my shadows. So opening up, I go to the right, see how it makes everything brighter? If I go to the left, it makes everything darker. All right, so I'm gonna actually open that way up. I'm gonna go to 65. Next up are my whites. If I go to the left, everything gets darker, and I go to the right, everything gets a little bit brighter. So I'm gonna go to about -10 is where I go on this. And then I do the same thing with my blacks. If you go to the left, it gets darker. If you go to the right, it gets a little brighter. And I like that contrasty kind of look, so I'm gonna go ahead and go with a -10. So that is about all I do with my tone. Now, when I go into my presence, I don't really mess with texture too much. I will work with texture more so when I'm working maybe with a headshot client, and females tend to like you to soften up their skin a little bit. That is a really great tool for that. What I do is I go ahead and bump up my clarity just a little bit. But like I said, let's play with these sliders. I go to the right. Look how it kind of changes those feathers. It's getting it kind of, you know, a little bit darker here. So here we go. Pulling in and then going out. It gives it a nice little kind of hazy look. So what I'm going to do is, because I like mine to look a little bit more sharper, I'm going to hit it at a 10. With dehaze, you kind of have the same kind of feel to it. If you go over towards the right, it kind of makes everything go sharp, whereas if you go left, it kind of blows everything out. So I'm just going to go ahead and put that at a 5. Now, with this particular photo, vibrance, I don't think is actually going to affect it that much. But I do definitely go ahead and I bump it up to about a 40. You can tell that if you looked, you could see it a little bit on the bird's breast here. If I go back to here, give Lightroom a second to think about it, it's kind of like a little bit more white, but you get a little bit of that sun. See how that sun kind of came in on the bird? Because I was shooting at very close to that twilight hour. And so you have the sun that is coming in from the right towards this bird. You can kind of see a little bit on the highlight right here. It's a little bit brighter right on around where like his eyebrow is. Okay, so the sun is coming from this direction. That's why you do not see a catch light, is because the sun is coming. It's like coming here. So it's like the eyes over here. So where the sun's coming through, you're missing that catch light. All right, so there's the vibrance. Now, if you want a little bit more of a pop, go ahead and hit a 5. And so there you go. You just give it a little bit more. Now, I let you guys know that we were not going to go into the tone curve, so we're going to skip right over that. But I do want to go into the HSL sliders. Now, the reason why is because sometimes I shoot in shadow mode. And when you shoot in shadow mode and you're outside, what tends to happen is your images get really orange, yellowy kind of color. And I like that because most people tend to be drawn to warmer images. That's the thought process behind why I do that. But sometimes it gets a little bit too much. So if you guys look back over here, what I do is I go ahead and I touch up my yellows a little bit. And so what I'll do is I'll click on my hue and I'll bring that down to a -10 just to take off a little bit of that color. I take off the saturation. I normally go to about a 15. And guys, I have like a kind of a normal range that I normally go to. All right, and then the luminance, I'm gonna go ahead and go to -10. And so that just kind of tones it down just a little bit. Now I'm going to go a little bit further on. I'm not going to mess with color grading. Like I said, this is simple. Just the bare basics of what I do to get images started. When I edited this image originally the first time, this is exactly what I did to it. It was very simple, very, very basic. All right, so moving right along, sometimes I will go ahead and increase the sharpness. You know, it just kind of depends on the image, on whether or not I bump that up or not. I don't want to do it too much because if you do it too much, it will sometimes look a little bit fake, but I will go ahead and sometimes bump it up. So that one just kind of, you know, in all of these settings too, you know, do them to your own flavor. And what I do is not necessarily what's best for you or your image or whatnot. And also too, when you think about it, there's different lighting conditions. But this is normally my starting point of where I go. Needless to say, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of luminance. Making my notes here. All right, just making sure I'm in the right spot here. My luminance, I go ahead and do a negative 10, actually a positive 10. There you go. What this does is it kind of does a little bit of noise reduction. There's not too much noise in this particular photo. I'm shooting at 800 ISO. You can see that my f-stop is at 6.3. So trying to get that focal point was a little bit hard because the aperture was a little bit smaller there. And then I'm shooting on 3200th of a second. And I'm fully extended on my lens on this particular shot. So needless to say, you can go ahead and bump up the luminance if you want, or you can bring it back down. But I normally just do a little bit. Now, if the image is super, like, let's say it's really super grainy or something like that, then I will definitely bump up the luminance a lot more. But for this image, really, it's, you know, it's not super grainy, so I just do just a little bit, just a little touch. All right, so moving right along, I make sure that the remove chromatic aberration is checked. I also make sure that enable profile corrections is correct, or corrections is correct. Corrections is checked. See, when it's unchecked, you see how you get some of that vignetting around where the lens is, and then you go ahead and take a little bit of that away when you have that checked off. All right. And it also kind of changes the shape of the image, and depending on where the subject is, really sometimes will depend on how it looks. And it also sometimes, if an image looks better without it not checked than checked, then I will definitely do that. The last thing I normally do is I will go ahead and come over here, and I can go ahead and add a little bit of a vignette. Now, if you go to the right, it's going to be brighter. If you go to the left, it's going to be darker. So now what I normally do is I do around a negative 10 is what I normally do. I don't like to be too dark on that. Sometimes other things that I will do is I will add a mask and feather and all that other fun stuff. But I said today we're going easy peasy today. So we're going easy peasy today, all right? So basically that's it. When it comes to your sliders over here, what this roundness is, let me try to get it to... Let's do the midpoint. So you can tell, you can just adjust a little bit. You can see a little bit of it changing on the screen. The feather, I normally leave to 50, but you can, let me make it a little bit darker. That would help. That would make it easier for you all to see. With the feather, you obviously, you know, unless you're looking for that effect to look like it's going through a telescope, you can go ahead and bring the feather down to a 0, or you can go to 100, which makes it really feathery, or about 50. So it kind of, you know, you just play with it and see what is the look that you're looking for. I tend to leave my feather around a 50, and then I just do a little bit of a vignette there. So just a little bit, because with the vignette, what it does is it kind of brings your attention to the middle of the frame. And like I mentioned to you all, I normally do not do any cropping until I take an image to print, or like in the case where I was making the digital product, I went ahead and I did crop, because when it goes onto the desktop, I wanted it to be cropped with the rule of thirds. Now, why is this a good photograph? The reason why I think this is a good photograph is because it's a very simplistic type of image. There's not a lot going on. You've got the good bokeh. The bird is almost running. I love how you can kind of see the sand kicking up here. I did not have to adjust anything with like leveling him out either. That's something also to keep in mind. If an image is not level, you would want to straighten out, but he's already straightened out pretty much. So if you wanted him to go a little bit brighter, you might want to go a little bit brighter. But outside of that, that's really all I would do for a very, very simple edit. All right, so if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat pod. Let me know, what is your favorite shorebird? Drop that in the comments below. Thank you so much for taking time to hang out with me today. I greatly appreciate it. And I want you to know that you are awesome. Have a fantastic rest of the week, and I'll see you later, alligator.